brought to you by Summit. And as a friend of Summit's, it's a great pleasure to introduce him today. So Joel, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more, and the floor will be yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Miller, and thank you to Summit University or Summit International Institute for inviting me to be here this morning or this afternoon from your location. It is already said, my name is Joel Mbanyanding. I'm a Cameroonian citizen. I'm from Cameroon. Cameroon is a country of, yes, 475,000 kilometers, kilometer squares in Central Africa. For those who know Burundi, Burundi enters in Cameroon about 18 times. We have almost all climates in Cameroon, and Cameroon is the leading country in particular economically in the Central Africa. And but for a long time I haven't been living in my country because I've been studying and working out of Cameroon. I'm a trained accountant and I have a strong accounting background, but I shifted from accounting to international development and cooperation in 2005 when I went to Spain to study international cooperation in development in the Complutense University of Madrid. Then I worked with project finances, and for the past 10 years I've been country directors of NGOs, in particular the Adventist Development and Relief Agency that I left a few months ago when I entered, I joined Oxfam International as country director here in Burundi. So before entering Oxfam International in Burundi, I was working as country director of the Adventist Development and Relief Agency for 3 years here in Burundi. I also have experience in working in the Sahel and in Central Africa, in particular in Equatorial Guinea, where I've also been a country director and a program manager. So I'm glad to be here to share my experience with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting and a long career. He's going to prepare his PowerPoint now, which again is a very fascinating one. So just give him just a moment to do so. Please remember, everyone, try to think of questions. You have real experts. I mean, this is very, very unique opportunities, especially for those of us from Japan. So please remember to think of some questions. Thanks.
Yeah, from the beginning. Yeah, I said.
Okay, thank you. I have been asked to talk about the work of NGO. And I was wondering, what am I going to share about about the work of NGOs, because the work of NGOs is very wide, because NGOs work in various sectors, and there are hundreds of NGOs in the world, and even thousands, including international and local NGOs. So I've decided to title my presentation Key Points to Know About NGOs, Concept and Practice. Key points, because I cannot share everything like I've said it earlier. Now, concept and practice, because I'm going to tell you about the theory of NGOs, on what basis NGOs are working, and then essentially share my personal experience. I've been working for the past 15 years with NGOs. I've been in the nonprofit sector, but for the past 15 years, I've been working with NGOs, and I went through many experiences that I will be glad to share. Though I work in finances and also in project management, I will share a general. I will share in general my experience as an expatriate working as a country director. You can see from the presentation that now we have the Sustainable Development Goals that have 17 goals, and it's on the basis of those goals that NGOs are working. Before it were the Millennium Development Goals. That went till 2015 when the Sustainable Development Goals were introduced. But I'm not going to enter in the details of these because there is a lot a lot to say. Now, what is an NGO? We all know that an NGO, it's a non-governmental organization. An NGO means non-governmental organization, meaning organizations that are not working as part of the government. They are independent from the work of the government. Government are about politics and, of course, caring about the well-being of their people. But NGOs, non-governmental organizations, are part of what is called the civil society. And the civil society is about all what is between the populations and the government. Businesses are also part of the civil society. But NGOs are different with the businesses because NGOs do not make profit, and NGOs work on the base of humanitarian principles. And before we proceed, I would like to pay a tribute to our colleagues who passed away in the Niger in the beginning of this month. You have certainly been informed about 10 humanitarians who have been sacrificed or murdered in Niger. You can see the pictures of their vehicles. There are some pictures that I could share, but I don't want to do it because I know there are some people who cannot be the site of those atrocities. And this was in the region of Tillabéri in Niger, in a place called Kouré, the Kouré Giraffe Reserve. This is a place that I visited several times. I've actually been passing through these areas during almost 6 years when I was working in Niger. When the Mali crisis blasted, I was among the first humanitarians who visited the place for what is called a need assessment. The need assessment is a visit to see the essential needs to be addressed by the government, by the humanitarian community to save life and to relieve the suffering of the populations. And what happened to these people could happen to me, could have happened to me because I've been working in this area, sometimes even coming back by night, not that I wanted to do so, but because I was prompted. I and other humanitarians were prompted by the greatest need in this area. We are together with our brothers, our colleagues of ACTED who have lost their staff. And I like what happened, the announcement of ACTED that said, in spite of what happened, ACTED is going to continue to be near the populations of Niger and support them in their needs. This is what is called humanity. In spite of the suffering or the dangers they are running, humanitarians or NGOs continue to work because of the principles of humanity that prompts them to save lives, whatever the cost. These pictures that you see, I took them in 2011, I think, end 2011 or beginning 2012, when the Malian refugee crisis blasted. And I went to see these people. They were starting to settle. And I saw this small lady fetching water. I cannot, fetching water, it's even to exaggerate because there was no water. This small lady was bending, like watching the water to see how the water was going to emerge from the ground. And then she was picking a kind of a handful of water and then take it to her parents. And I decided to take these pictures. Pictures are very important in the work that we do. Because through pictures, those who want to support individuals, organizations, donors, they can see what the people actually feel. They can see what people live and then support the populations in need. I remember when I was then a financial director of the Adventist Development and Relief Agency that has been working in Wash in Niger. And when I took this picture to my colleagues in the office, I remember our programs director, Mrs. Elizabeth Brooks, she said, "Oh, thank you very much, Joel, for these pictures. These pictures are going to make a lot of money for the people suffering." And it is true that this picture, the one that was selected, almost went around the world, and ADRA Niger collected a lot of funds to support the population of Mali. And thanks to these pictures, a lot of programs have been run in Niger by the Adventist Development and Relief Agency to support the populations. That's why you need to have good pictures. I'm actually telling you, explaining many things at a time because I may not come back to some details. Good pictures must be close pictures where the target can be very well seen, and a picture that shows an action, and that can prompt a response. Like this picture, when you see it, you can see the eyes of the small girl, and you can see that you can see the suffering. When you see the quality of the water, you understand that these people have a serious need of potable water in the area. This is why humanitarians make pictures, take pictures, and take good pictures that can prompt donors to give. And later, by organizations like many others supported in the refugee camps in Niger, in the water and hygiene and sanitation. Many wells were built in these settlements. So now NGOs come in various forms, and their common point is that we work in the basis of humanitarian principles. Governments have their laws, all societies have their laws, and all bodies also. But NGOs work on the basis of humanitarian principles, and we have 4 humanitarian principles. We have the principles of humanity that states that suffering must be addressed wherever it may be found. We have the principles of impartiality. That tells us that we must give priority to urgent cases, and we must not use any kind of discrimination. We must not discriminate on the basis of race. We must not discriminate on the basis of religion, on the basis of gender, of tribe. You see the need, you address it. And you must do it following the most urgent case. You must not serve the person because it's from your tribe, because it's from your country, but prompted by the need and the most urgent need. And we must also use the principle of neutrality. The principle of neutrality asks us not to take side in hostilities. When there is war and you are humanitarian, you are not going to say it's America against Afghanistan. So I'm an American. I'm not going to take care of those from Afghanistan. No. If you are a medical doctor working in the humanitarian field, you must take care of all those suffering. If you are distributing food items, you must distribute beginning by those who are the most in need. You must not say, this one is not from my country, I'm not going to take care of it. No. Independence. You must not serve the interests of a state. You see, all those principles almost look alike, but they are different. And though they are different, they are actually saying almost the same thing. It's a matter of saving lives without discrimination. The most important need must be covered. Now, NGOs, you have international NGOs, you have national NGOs. This is the way we can classify NGOs. International NGO or international organizations, or national NGOs or community-based organizations. International NGOs cover like a global scope or a regional scope or area. And there are not many. International NGOs, yes, there are many, but not as many as national NGOs. And they are able to acquire funds or to do fundraising from important donors. They have also acquired a kind of expertise that help them do the work in a very professional manner, and covering themes like advocacy, development. They can also build the capacity of humanitarian staff and build the capacity of local NGOs. As for local national NGOs or local NGO or community-based organizations, their strength is on local network. They live with the people in need. They live with the community. They know the community. They are national people who can help in need assessment to identify needs. When there is a particular situation, for example, like a crisis that has blasted, you will not go and talk with things. There are things that you can observe, but you will not understand them. But when you speak with local people, they understand the situation. They live the situation. They are the first victim, and also the first actors in the intervention. When there is a earthquake or there are some floodings, before an international NGO like Oxfam acted, or World Vision, or Care International comes to the ground, they will find that the local people have already started to act. They have already saved some life, and they have taken some measures to mitigate the situation or to solve the situation. Though they don't do it in a professional manner, they actually do it. Now, local actors or local NGOs, national or community-based organizations that are close to those populations and speaking their language are those making a kind of professional work, and international NGOs that come to act can rely on those community-based organizations to do their work. And these two kinds of organizations, or that is international NGOs and local NGOs, do not depend on the same, they do not depend on the same government, the government authority or body. In the case of Burundi, for example, you have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that takes care of international NGO. If an international NGO want to settle, they will go to, they will contact the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will give them an agreement that will authorize them to work. They will register. If a country director or an expatriate want to work in Burundi, he has to formally get an authorization, an agreement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And it's that agreement that authorizes him to enter the country and do the humanitarian work. Now, the national NGOs depend on the Ministry of Internal Affairs or the Ministry of Home Affairs. Some call it the Ministry of Homeland. It's relatively easy for them to register, though they have their process. But for international NGOs, it's not that easy to register. But like I've stated earlier, those national NGOs or community-based organizations depend more on the funding of international NGOs. But in the government, generally the Ministry of Interior is in charge of humanitarian intervention, and international NGOs also work in collaboration with the Ministry of Interior. And this because the government is actually the first humanitarian actor. I can call it that way. It's the government intervening, it's the government taking care of its populations. And NGOs are there only to support the work of the government. As a matter of fact, if a government says, we don't need an NGO in our country, no matter the extent of the crisis, no NGO will work. NGOs can see the need, but the government of the country must authorize NGOs to work, even the United Nations. Then NGOs can do their work. Another classification of NGOs is secular NGOs and faith-based NGOs. Secular NGOs are those NGOs who are not related to a particular faith, like Oxfam, Care, Action Against Hunger. They are created either by a group of individuals who decided to work on charities or organizations, or even some foundations. But faith-based organizations work are created by churches or religious organizations. You have organizations like ADRA, the Adventist Development and Relief Agency, that belongs to the Adventist Church, and you can feel it in their name. You have Caritas working for the Catholic, not working for the Catholic Church. They belong to the Catholic Church, but the Catholic Church is using them for the humanitarian purposes. You have the Islamic Relief that was created by Muslims, and that is working for humanitarian purposes in the name of the Muslim or in the name of Islam. And they generally convey the principles of their faith. They show the love of God in doing the humanitarian work. And you will find this in their mission statement or in their vision statement. I have worked for a long time with ADRA, and I know the way ADRA works very well, and I can take it as an example of what can characterize some humanitarian. I don't know if you can find someone who is not a Muslim working with Islamic relief. I know in Caritas, you can be Catholic and you can work for Caritas. You can be, you cannot be an Adventist and you work with ADRA, but all those organizations use people of their faith to lead those organizations. In the Adventist Development and Relief Agency, for example, it's not common to see a person who is not Adventist being a country director, a programs director, or a country director. Those are the key positions in NGOs. And some people even claim, no, you have to use only Adventists, or you have to use people who are part of the church. But this somehow also violate the good practices of NGOs. But they also have a kind of protection by law, because governments understand they are somehow representing their various religious confession. You also can classify NGOs by mandate. There are NGOs that dedicate themselves only for medicine, medical care, like Médecins Sans Frontières or Doctors Without Borders. You have Action Against Hunger, ACF, Action contre la faim in French, who essentially address hunger. And but all those NGOs in the field are complementary. They complement each other in their work. I can remember here in Burundi, one of the staff had his leg broken, completely broken, and he was taken to Médecins Sans Frontières, and he was reestablished. He received treatment. He was reestablished, and a year later, he started to work. And it was really amazing. It was like a miracle to me. And we didn't pay anything for it. We didn't pay. And this is a testimony of what NGOs can do. And it's not only, they don't do that only for NGOs, but they do it mostly for the general populations. You can imagine how many discapacitated people, how many physically challenged people we could have in our populations in Burundi and elsewhere if Médecins Sans Frontières was not there. They have specialists doing the work. Others are multi-mandate organizations. They are doing the work, but they are not doing a single work. They are not working only for a single purpose, like only to relieve hunger, but they are working in various They are working in various areas like advocacy, food security, food security, water and hygiene, and sanitation. NGOs can be differentiated also from their resources. There are some NGOs that have a lot of funds. There are some that have a portfolio that is reduced. A study, for example, showed that Save the Children, Oxfam, World Vision, IMRC, and Médecins Sans Frontières, that is Doctors Without Borders, have been accounting for 75% of expenditures among all NGOs. So they have been like somehow receiving 75% of funding among all the NGOs. And you will see that those are NGOs that are spread all over the world. And where they are not spread, where they are settled, they are very strong and even building the capacity of other NGOs. On the contrary, national NGOs just receive a small amount of funds. And as part of the grand bargain, those NGOs, the major NGOs in 2016 signed what is known as the grand bargain that decided to commit a good to give more responsibility to NGOs of the South or to humanitarian actors of the South and beneficiaries. That is, local NGOs or national NGOs receive a good amount of money and have a good responsibility in addressing humanitarian issues in their locality. And I can take the example of my organization, Oxfam Burundi. Oxfam in Burundi is giving 80% of the funds that we receive to local actors. We work with more than 10 local NGOs. When we receive 100,000, we give 80,000 to local NGOs. When we receive 1 million, we give 800,000 to local NGO for them to do the work. And we only supervise the work. We build their capacity. And this is because we as NGOs, international NGOs, even local NGOs are not there to work forever. NGOs come, they do the work, they address the need, and they leave. But when they leave, they must not leave the local populations like abandoned to themselves. They must build their capacity so that they are able to address their own challenges without the need of having humanitarian actors coming from outside. Even those coming from outside can support, but those inside are always the first actors. Oxfam Burundi, for example, is going to close in some 2 years from now. And as part of our plan, we are going to build the capacity of local actors. We are going to train to give more capacity to the local NGOs who are our partners, so that they can continue to do the work that we have been doing together. NGOs have governance. The governance is like the highest body ruling NGOs. I've already spoken about the registration of NGOs, but it's the governance that actually requests an NGO to open in a country or in a region. And they are the highest body deciding. They can also decide to close an NGO. requirements between local and international NGOs are different. Now, the governance is different between organizations, but generally, the governance decides. The governance doesn't have many members, but their members are a kind of sandwich where you need to find an expertise, various expertise according to the area of work of the NGOs. The governance also sometimes work through the boards, like the board represents the governance, and they put in place some bylaws or a constitution that regulates the work of the organization and also the work of that same governance. The whole regular meetings, it can be maybe once per year, some meet once per semester, or even per term. But I must say that it's a bit challenging for them to work always because those people are scattered in various organizations. Some are retirees and they are in various settings in such a way that it's not always easy to put them together. And they are also they have been working as voluntary, and all those who are members of the governance or the boards actually participate. They have to participate when with their funds or materially to encourage the donors and show the donors that they are already participating in the work of the NGO or in the life of the NGO. There must be an example. It is encouraged that 100% of the board members and also those part in the governance participate in the activities and in the funding of the NGO. Members of the governance and the board need to visit the activities of the organization from time to time in such a way that they can touch the reality in the ground or the reality in the field, and then recommend some changes where necessary. In the case of ADRA, most of those, or almost all those who are part of the governance is the church. It's actually the church that plays the role of the governance. And then the church put in place a board with part of the church members or the church administration, and then they will pick some people with a particular expertise that can be part of the church or not. But I must confess that the tendency is to have people who are part of the church to be there. And at Oxfam, the governance is almost scattered all over the world. In my office at Oxfam Burundi, I am a member. The country director used to be part of the board. I'm a member of the board, what is called the country governance. The country, it's called the CGG. That is the country governance. And other members are in the Netherlands. Other members are in Nairobi, where we have our international headquarters. So they are scattered. In Burundi, I'm the only member of our board. I've already spoken about the case of the registration. Now, NGOs work with donors. Without donors, we cannot work. For donors, we have private funding sources. We have institutional funding. For private funding sources, we have corporation, we have individuals, we have foundations. For individuals, it's easy. You can find in the website, on the website of organization, on the website of NGOs, where they are asking individuals to participate. There are applications where you can donate through your credit cards or debit cards. You will also find some people like in the metro or the bus stop or going around in cities in some in-gathering. It's called in-gathering, organized by organizations to collect funds, whatever the amount. People can also participate with a monthly contribution or a yearly contribution. But the major source of funding for NGOs is institutional funding. Institutional funding come from governments from rich countries, in particular Western governments. You have what is called the Development Assistance Committee, that is composed by rich countries that use their agencies. For example, the United States contributes through the USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. You have Denmark contributing through DANIDA. DANIDA is the international, the Danish agency for international cooperation and development. You have NORAD for Norway. You have SIDA for Sweden. Great Britain have theirs. France have their own. You have the DFID, Agence Française de Développement. So there are many. Those are the ones giving the major funding, about 80% of the funds that NGOs are using. Now, there are other called emerging donors that are from countries like Kuwait, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Brazil. Those ones have accounted in the last year 5% of funding in the work that NGOs are doing. I don't want to go in the details of other funding mechanisms, but you can have like the United Nations also are donating, but the funds that they are receiving are also coming from those governments individually or joined together. When NGOs or governments join together to put money in one basket for development, that is called the pooled funds. Pooled funds, see, pooled funds are like a kind of basket where donors, all kinds of donors put money. They will contribute, and then when there is an emergency, when there is a particular emergency of a particular fund, that amount can be released to quickly address the issue. And generally, the UN, the pool fund controlled by the UN is released by the humanitarian coordinator, in the country. I would like to share the experience of these pictures as we proceed and explain also as NGOs work. Here it was in Niger. This particular picture was in Niger. I've moved forward. Let me come back to this picture. This was in Niger, where we went to take care of to share. We went to share food and non-food items to the Malian refugees, and I went with these medical students. It's a medical student who currently is who is already working as a medical doctor. Is from Chad, Odei, and you see he's wearing the ADRA logo here, ADRA shirt. This is for the visibility. When we go to the ground as NGOs, we need to show that this is Oxfam, this is World Vision, and this identifies us from the rest of the population, and it identifies us from the soldiers from the army, so that we are not targeted, though terrorists do not make the difference. And then I went with this woman that you can see, but first he came and we took him as a volunteer. So volunteers are also important for the work that we are doing. And this woman, you see, is a Tuareg. We went with her because she knows the community. She has actually been working as a house worker of my country director. And I took her to the ground. I went, though I'm an expatriate. Expatriate were not supposed to go to visit this place. But I went there because of my color, because I'm not white, and white people are targeted. So I could easily mingle and not be taken as a target, not draw the attention. So I was coordinating the work in the ground, and my country director coordinating the work from the office. And I took this as a volunteer. Those two were volunteers, and we took this one because she's a Tuareg. Tuaregs were part of the refugees, a tribe that came as part of the refugee, and she understands the language. We do not understand. So she was complimenting her. She was complimenting us. And here it was another distribution in, now it was in Burundi. And you can see that this quantity is 20 kilos. And this is what was given to the population. And here it's a house that we also built. And you can see here that you also have designs for the visibility. You need to show that it's your NGO doing the work. So you identify yourself, and you also identify the donors. So you write a gift from USAID, a gift from DFID. So that is about the visibility. I would like to proceed this about the donation. Sometimes we also give our own. I've already commented about the grand bargain that was signed by 61 humanitarian actors. And we also make our personal experience when we go to the humanitarian ground. And you see this woman, we found it's actually a girl. I think it's a girl. I took this picture and I realized that there was a baby, it should be this baby, who was very sick. I saw that this baby was almost dying. She was maybe going to die in the next hours or in the next days. And I thought you were going back, because we went for the need assessment. Now we were going back to Niamey, the capital, 200 kilometers from this scene. And I said, when we come back, maybe 1 or 2 weeks later, this baby would have died already. And the sister was also shivering. She had malaria or malaria, I think. So, and there was no communication. The communication here is only through satellite phone. I couldn't contact my wife to ask if I can take these people. So I personally decided to go with this girl, and I took her and also the mother. So finally, I find myself with about 3 or 4 people living in my compound, and I took care of the whole family. I arrived and we took them immediately to the clinic, and they were healed. They ate what we ate, and we took them to the clinic, and when they were healed, like 2 or 3 weeks later, we took them back to the refugee camp. So sometimes you will even have some personal sacrifice to do when you work in the humanitarian field. We work with humanitarian principles. Like I've said in the beginning, humanitarian principles are part of the standards and codes of the humanitarian world. We have some rules that we have to obey, because ours is this work we are doing is is a delicate work. And we have to have our standards that that rule our work, because some people pretend to be humanitarians while they are not. They are there because they are trying to make profit while we are working in a non-profit sector. So humanitarian principles have been put in place, and other codes to rule the work of humanitarian. But all of the codes and principles that can be found are based on humanitarian principles. The 4 core humanitarian principles are humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence. I've already explained from the beginning what it is about. Humanity, saving life. Impartiality is to serve on the basis of need alone. Neutrality, not to take sides in a conflict in the basis of religion, race, or tribe. And independence, not serve the interest of a state, serving the interest of a state. And when humanitarian principles are not respected, this can expose humanitarian. There is a case that is well known in the humanitarian world. That is the case in Afghanistan. You remember the war in Afghanistan following the trade center, the trade center crisis. Let me call it like that. When Americans went to throw bombs in Iraq, and then it became at the same time a crisis involving Afghanistan and Pakistan. It is said that some of these principles, because America was part of the crisis, and America and the United States have been providing humanitarian aid through USAID in particular. Humanitarians started to be targeted because they were not seen as neutral. And some NGOs even tried to avoid identifying themselves with USAID or with America for fear to be targeted. And then the USAID wrote to humanitarian actors and asked those receiving funding from the United States to clearly identify them. It identified themselves with the USAID, and said that the aid work that they are doing, or the humanitarian work that they are doing, is funded by USAID. That is, by the American people and the American government. And there, you don't actually see how to do your work without being neutral, impartial, or independent. And this is one of the dilemma that humanitarians find in the ground. How far, how good, how neutral, how independent, and how impartial can be an NGO while working in the field. Another principle, so most workers, almost all NGOs respect the humanitarian principles and the code of conduct of the Red Cross. I also signed it when I started work. I've been signing it regularly. So this is part of the standards and codes respected by NGOs. We also have to sign other things that have to do with gender-based violence and many other documents. And or documents that can be considered as the Bible of the humanitarian community, or the Bible for NGOs, is the Sphere Handbook that shows the norms of the NGOs. The first one was issued in 1997, after the Rwanda crisis and the joint evaluation emergency assistance to Rwanda, because a lot of limits were shown in the work of NGOs, and then the humanitarian community decided to have a book showing minimum standards for emergency interventions. So in the Sphere Handbook, you will find minimum standard intervention about on water and hygiene and sanitation, and on food security and nutrition, shelter and settlement, and then health. The latter edition was published in 2018. So this is the essential that I wanted to present to you. Like I've said, this 1 hour is a lot, but if we could divide the work of NGO, the presentation about the work of NGO in sections, maybe funding, funding and donors, activities, humanitarian principles, or the humanitarian code of conduct, so that we develop all those aspects. It could have been better, but you understand that we don't have time, and I only share the essential. Thank you for listening. I hope I was not too fast, though I know I haven't gone in the details, but I wanted to insist on the essentials of the humanitarian work from the beginning. I could use only pictures, and from any picture of a situation that I lived in the ground, I can develop humanitarian principles and develop about funding. But I believe you have heard enough, and for the rest, if you are interested, I can share some readings and also some websites that you can browse and learn on your own. There are many free courses and free website where you can have courses and certificate about the work of NGOs for those who want to work on the humanitarian sectors. But I would like to close asking all of you to support the work that NGOs are doing as much as you can. It can be by clicking one like on the page of an NGO. It can be writing a comment of support in the publication of NGO on Facebook, LinkedIn, or in the social network where you find yourself. It can also be with your financial support, contributing €1 or €2 in an NGO where you have chosen to do that, where you NGO of your choice, because ending poverty in the world is the business of everyone. Like I used to say, ours is the business of poverty. Where there is poverty, where there is the crisis, where there are development challenges, there you will find NGOs. And you will not find many NGOs in countries like America, France. And you find them, they are just focal points to see how to get funding and send them to Africa, Asia, or in other areas where there is a suffering. But the question remains: can poverty end? Can suffering in humanitarian, in the humanities, sufferings in our world end? When suffering ends, where challenges end, where crisis ends, this is when NGOs are also going to end. If not, the work of NGOs is going to continue. But it is our dream that the work of NGO one day, if it doesn't end, at least it can reduce because of the impact of the current work that we are doing in various parts of the world. Thank you again very much for listening, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to make my presentation.
Well, thank you very much. I thought that was very interesting. And everybody, I mean, we could hear firsthand accounts, and we could also, hear, these are real experiences. So I thought that was really unique, and it was a real, interesting and excellent opportunity. Does anybody have any questions to start? Anybody?
Can I have a question?
Yes.
Hello. So thank you very much, Joel, for your informative presentation. I'm just wondering that you we're talking about the NGOs in Africa and in Burundi and those areas. And so what do you think some of the biggest issues that NGOs have operating in Africa, would you say?
Thank you. The biggest issues, the question is broad.
Yes, it's very broad. So what kinds of issues do they have? Yeah, would be okay.
Yes. I can say maybe the main issues of NGOs in Africa is about like the understanding of the population. Let me call it funding or the needs, because the need is very great. The needs are high, but funding is never enough. If you check in what is called the Financial Tracking Service of OCHA, you can see the difference between the needs that are reported by humanitarian organizations and the funding that are supposed to be provided. And you will see that there is always a gap between the needs and the funding. In the beginning of the year, the humanitarian country team, OCHA and the humanitarian country team, in partnership with local government, presents the needs of the country, and they identify how much funds is needed per sector. But it's difficult to have the funds because the funds always come late. And as the year goes on, there are new needs that are coming, but the funding still remains a challenge. For example, we are now in the month of August. Half of the year has already passed, but I'm sure in Burundi, half of the funds, even half of the funds needed for the humanitarian organizations to meet the local challenges are not yet given. And this is the case in many countries. Another challenge that is met is the challenge of corruption and governance. Because some funds are not used for the real purpose, in such a way that the money given is not always used for the challenges that are in the ground, but that money ends in the hands of people who are not in need and who use it to enrich themselves.
Sure.
There are actually many challenges that I can list. Another challenge is even the understanding of the populations. Like I was saying in the beginning, the populations feel the need to be helped. They need to be helped always. And it's like they are never able to meet their own needs. Let me take this example. I've been saying to my staff, where I've been working in my former organization, I said to them, you see, the money that we receive to do our work is coming from the white people. And those white people, sometimes it's even small boys and girls who give €1, €5, and they send it to us so that we do the work. Let us try to gather some funds together also. We have big donors. Let us be small donors and gather the funds. We are having a salary. We NGOs workers are among those having the best income in the country. So let's use a small amount of our income and also make our own project. Maybe build a classroom in one of your villages, or maybe distribute toys or school material to students somewhere. This can be a good project for us, and it will be say, donated by ADRAS workers, donated by Oxfam workers, donated by World Vision workers in Burundi. This has never succeeded because in the minds of Africans, we must always be received. We are poor and poor forever. and we need to receive help from the white people. And of course, most organizations or most local people, when they see an African like me being their leader, their country director, they don't like fellow Africans to be their director. Some do not like, because they say, when it's a white man, when it's a Westerner, it always comes with some money and with a container following. But in African, there is nothing he will give. But we must learn, we Africans must learn also to be our own donors, to support our own people. Like Americans, when they have a problem, they help themselves. When Westerners have a problem, they help themselves. But Africans, though some have started to understand, but most Africans do not understand that we can also help ourselves and address our own needs. Sure. I guess this is also one of the issues that the Great Bargain is trying to address, giving more responsibility to local people.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. That addresses a lot of what I had in mind.
Yeah, very interesting question. Thank you. Any other questions? For example, Kikuchi-sensei, did you have a question? Or Sakura, hi.
Keiko's here.
Keiko's here, yeah. And Sakura, you just unmuted yourself. Would you like to ask a question? Maybe not. We can always break up into groups, but I think it's a great opportunity right now if anybody has any other questions for the speaker. Yuta, did you have anything that you wanted to ask?
Well, I was kind of wondering what would happen if say one day, I mean, this is very impractical, but if one day there comes a time when NGOs are no longer necessary, right? What do you think would happen with the NGOs? Do you think they would just fade away and disappear, or I'm not sure.
Thank you for your question. It's a question that I've raised getting to the end of the presentation. In my own opinion, that is really difficult because NGOs are there to address the challenges of the people. And it's almost a dream to say that the humanity or the world is no more going to meet any emergency or any development challenge. Because development is relative. I know even Japanese, Americans, French people that we find very developed, that we call developed countries, have not sat and said, the democracy we have reached is enough. We have reached the best level of democracy. So you are still going to have some NGOs working on advocacy. We will never stop we can never stop storms or floodings or earthquakes. And when these happen, humanitarians are the one working. The government is not leaving, they are not leaving their offices. Businessmen are not leaving their business and then go to intervene. NGOs are the one intervening. So I believe NGOs are still going to be needed. Maybe they are form it is going to change, and their missions also are going to be shifted. But I don't believe they are going to end.
My son, thank you very much for that, Joel. Was that answering your question, Yuta?
Yes, thank you.
So I think my son also had a question.
Yes. So you said that it is important for you to not discriminate people. So how can you treat people fairly? Like, do you have any advice to when we communicate people who like this person, like these people who need help?
I didn't get the question very well.
Okay, I will say again. So my question is, you say that it is important for you to treat people fairly, like not discriminate people. So how can you do that? So do you have any advice for us to do that?
Yes, the only advice is what I've said during the presentation. We work on the basis of humanitarian principles,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to serve the people on the basis of need alone, on the basis of need alone. Now, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
there is what is called positive discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
That is, we choose to cover a particular ethnic group because we and our aim is to render justice. For example, you may know an ethnic group called the Pygmies, or in Burundi they are called the Twas. Those are very short people living in the bush from hunting. In Burundi, for example, they represent 1% of the population. And it is known in Burundi that there is an ethnic that represents the minority, that is 14% of the population. There is an ethnic group representing 85%, another ethnic group representing 14%. And the group representing 14% is always called the minority. But actually there is a forgotten minority that represent only 1% of the population. Those are Pygmies or Twa. So when we do our need assessments or we do our projects, we decide to identify those from 1% who sometimes you will not see them, you will not find even a single beneficiary among them in one project. And I remember I hired one person of that ethnic group in my former organization, because I asked, have you ever hired one of those persons in this organization? Say, no, never. They don't like going to school. They don't like even working. They like being on their own. I said, okay, I will hire one. And I hired a lady from that ethnic group. That one I discriminated because I said, I'm going to hire one of those ethnic groups. But that was for a good purpose. But when you go to the field and you hire people, you just have to make sure all ethnic groups are represented and that none of them is discriminated. One of them is left outside. You can check from the local population. Actually, you don't even need to check. They themselves will come and complain. They will say, why is it that you have selected only people from this tribe and you didn't take, or why is it that you didn't take any person from our ethnic group? And it's that way that your attention is drawn and you'll say, and when you check, you realize that yes, some people are not represented, and then you work to include them among the beneficiaries.
Thank you.
Is it okay?
Oh yeah, really good answer. So about, it's a tribal thing in Africa, isn't it? It's very different to Japan, where they're all basically all Japanese, right? So they wouldn't have that issue in Japan to even consider that, right? When hiring, right? So Joel, can you see your chat, Joel? Because Sakura wrote a message into the chat, a question for you. Can you see that?
Oh no, let me.
Can you just go to the bottom and then go on the chat, and it'll open up. Can you see the chat? I can read it for you.
Yes.
I'll read it. So I'd like to establish a new international NGO in the future, but I'm worried that it may be difficult to raise funds because the new NGO will have a poor track record compared to existing NGOs. So what is important for a relatively new NGO to be successful or to successfully raise funds and continue to grow?
Okay, thank you. When you are opening a new NGO, the first thing is to have a legal acceptance in your area of work. You register, you have the necessary document, and then you exist as an NGO. And now you have to attend cluster meetings. Cluster meetings, there are 11 clusters in the world. Clusters are led, they are international and country clusters. Clusters are like a kind of meetings where humanitarian actors, NGOs, the government, and the United Nations humanitarian actors meet. They usually have monthly meetings. When you go to those meetings as a new NGO, you are going to hear about the current trend of NGOs in your area of work. You will know that currently in Burundi, for example, there are refugees, Burundians, refugees in Rwanda who are about to come back to the country. Now, this news is an opportunity for NGOs based in Burundi. And this morning I've given a communication to my leadership about this, and I've started to mobilize my team about it. Because those people, those refugees coming back are going to be returnees, meaning that the UN is going to be mobilized, or many clusters are going to be mobilized to receive them. They need food. So projects need to be prepared on food security. They need a shelter. If you work on shelter, you can already get closer. You can already approach various donors working on shelter. They will also, their children will need to go to school. You can approach the UNICEF that works on education and see how you can support them. Now, when you have a relationship with those people, personal relationships are very good to build relations. It's even easier to have. It looks a bit like corruption or but it's not corruption. It's public relations. It's building relations. When you speak directly with those people, they understand you better than writing a document and sending. So you approach them, and then can tell you, there is this funding there, and there is this. They can even orient you. They will orient you. Also, you need to approach other NGOs working in the sector. As a new NGO, you want to present your image. You must make yourself known among other NGOs through your visibility, a good visibility, a good name that draw attention. You can distribute flyers among other humanitarian organizations, build relationships with other organizations that are already well settled in the ground, and you work in partnership with them. Starting alone, you are on your own is difficult unless it's a small funding. But for big funding and have access with important donors, you have to approach other donors and maybe receive funding from them. They receive the big funding and you go as their implementing partner. They work on food security. You can go and start distributing food on their behalf, and they give you expertise, and they also give you a name. You can also be work in what is the name? You work in it's in consortium. You can work in consortium, like NGOs joining, 2, 3 NGOs joining to seek a common funding, and you benefit from their expertise. that's what I can say now. For the time, there's a lot to say, but I believe this is helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sakura-san, it answered the question, so yeah. We
Okay,
have to say
thank
it's
you.
really interesting.
Thank
Are there
you.
any other questions? I think Keiko-san, your name popped up very briefly. Do you have a question?
Yeah, no. Thank you. Actually, I'm out today. I'm in Saitama, Ogawamachi, so my battery is going out. So I'm
Oh, I
sorry.
see. No.
I will be out at any time. But that yeah. So student who wants to open an NGO in the future, it's really great. And the suggestion
in
was
Africa,
also
and I
very
guess if
nice.
they're going to be
Yeah.
doing international, I think Sakura-san, are you talking about running it from Japan or running it, or expanding into Africa or what? So there's something to consider. So, but you could learn about actually how these NGOs operate or are operating in Africa as well, which is really useful to know. Some of the information you gave us today, I think. So, Professor Miller, do you have any other comments, or anybody else have any questions? Final questions, because we're coming up to, we've got about 8 more minutes.
Yeah, we got a few more minutes left. But that I thought that was really interesting, and you know, it's always interesting to hear somebody who's got real experience in the field.
On the ground. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic, and really amazing stories. You know, the Tuareg and the and again, you know, hearing about that story was just incredible. So quite impressed. Yeah. And that was in Niger, right?
Niger, and
Yes, it was in Niger. Yeah.
I don't think that news reached Japan, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. It wasn't, you know, well, Niger's been a bit, they've always had like that kind of, even recently, right? So there's been, the Tuareg have always been that challenging kind of group that, you know, they've been kind of going back and forth into Libya and up a little bit further north, but just absolutely incredible. Yeah. Oh, good. Well, and yeah, and it's also interesting to hear that the Burundi refugees are coming back from. They're also coming back from Tanzania soon, right? Is that they've been coming, right? So.
Yes, Burundians refugees have been coming back from Tanzania for years already. They are coming more from Tanzania,
Right.
but there is a challenge. There is a challenge with Rwanda. Rwanda and Burundi have always had a challenging relationship.
Sure.
And like kind of conflictual relationship. And there is one of the biggest refugee camp, Burundians refugees in Rwanda. Those have not been coming. And the government of Burundi believes that like Rwandians, their refugees somehow are not allowed to come back for political reasons. Sure. And recently there was a letter that was shared in social media. The letter was written by refugees accusing the Rwandan government not allowing them to come back to their